Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing a couple of tips about how you can actually store and restore your clay for a longer duration. I think it's a question which I think a lot of you have been asking me both over Facebook, via email, and on YouTube. So I think I just thought this would be an appropriate video to make. So now if you see what I have here is a so over here I usually get clays in about 25-pound bags, which is pretty huge. And especially for terracotta jewelry making, it can take a while for that quantity of clay to get exhausted. So now this has just come down to maybe the last, maybe about 3 kgs of maybe more, maybe about 4 kgs of clay probably. But then if you realize, a lot of times, most places obviously provide clay in thick, good quality plastic bags like these, and the recommendation obviously is to store it back in these. And a lot of times what one observes is that the surface sometimes tends to get a little hard. I would just make dents in these. Now I have like a dowel or something here. You can use a scale, you can use anything. You can use like a knife, you can use any kind of a sculpting tool. The idea is basically so that you make pockets, something like that. You can spray a little bit of water on the surface of this, or just apply a little bit of water on this. A sprayer works really well. You get that for very, very it's very reasonably priced, and it's a good thing to have. So you can just put clay in the water on the surface of clay like this, just so that it seeps in. Make sure the bag is also nice and moist. And then you can just wrap it up, and the next time when you actually open your clay bag rather, it's going to be good for you to use. As in, the idea is to just moisten the surface, and these pockets typically carry the water through the different layers, and that's exactly why we are making such pockets. And remember, there are no hard and fast rules about how I've made this pocket. I do think warm water helps to break down or sometimes even quicken this process. So this way what happens is, if you just spray a little bit of water on the surface, immediately take the bag and cover it up nice and tight. And you can use a rubber band, a twisty cable, anything that you want, and so that it's just nice and tightly wrapped up. And then typically I would just keep it this way, and it just stays. And my suggestion is probably to do this every time. If you think you live in a place where your clay just tends to get dried out very quickly, what you can do is just drop spray water on the surface of clay, and you should be able to use the clay for a very, very long time. And yeah, I think this would probably be one of the most important tips. I will also be what I'll probably show you is, I think, something which a few of you have asked me as to what happens when the clay is extremely moist, and you kind of are unable to work with it because it becomes awfully sticky. So let's get on with that now. So now we'll see how we can actually reclaim clay. A lot of times I think what happens is your clay ends up looking like this, or probably even more mushier than this. So a lot of times you probably are like, okay, this is like super, super wet. I cannot even this is obviously not in a workable state. So my suggestion is obviously to kind of spread it out on your board a little bit. Just make you can just make it in this manner. Your fingers obviously do get, but you're working with clay, you cannot think of any other alternative here. You just try to spread it out as much as you can. This is visibly very, very wet. You cannot mold anything when clay is this wet. So the suggestion would be to just spread it out on a board like this. Now this is a wooden board, so you can just use an MDF or whatever, and then just spread it out on this kind of a board and let it sit for a few minutes. And depending, see, the thing is, it'll have to probably sit for more than a few minutes, if I have to correct myself, because the kind of weather, the kind of humidity in each of the locations are obviously different. So I would typically, it's, for me, over here it's peak winter, so I would typically let this sit at least for about 30 minutes. In fact, if this was any more moist, for example, if there was more moisture, just really like probably closer to slip or slurry, then I would have probably let it sit on the board for much longer. But I think going by this, I might let it sit for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and then I would probably come back and take a look at it. But my suggestion is, if you have not done this before, please do check at regular intervals. I mean, you can make out, especially if you've been working with clay, you can clearly make out the moldable state that you're most comfortable with. A lot of times, people attempt working on clay at a stage like this, which is not at all possible. You cannot really get anything clear out of something like this, unless I don't know if this is the kind of shape that you're looking at. But if you're trying to look at something a little bit more specific, especially in terms of jewelry, where you're trying to work on something which is round or rectangular or whatever shape it might be, this is very difficult to mold. So ideally, you would just want to let this sit and spread it out. The idea is that you can spread out the clay just so that the air is actually able to work through and make the clay a little bit more drier. And when I say dry, I do not mean extremely dry, because then obviously it goes to the other extreme. So make sure that you actually don't forget about this. That's all. Just try and look at it at regular intervals and see if it's reached a stage where it's moldable. And after about 20 minutes or so, I'll probably see how this is, and maybe after about 15 minutes or so, I'll probably come and take a look at the clay and see if this can be just wedged and probably kneaded, and then if I can make something out of it. So yeah, now we wait. So it's been roughly about 21 minutes approximately over here, and if you see, the clay is a lot more drier and more pliable than what it was when we actually started. You can see that if I try taking it out, it comes out much more easier, and you realize that all of that moisture, that excess moisture from the surface, obviously the external weather has basically done that, and then also the wood has kind of helped absorb all of that excess moisture. So this is obviously much more easier, I would say, to work with. But my suggestion would be not to right away just start rolling it and start working on it. The suggestion would be to typically knead this clay a bunch of times and then begin working, because a clay like this would have a lot of air pockets inside. It's going to be very difficult to have something which is not going to have like small air bubbles. For example, if you're making a pendant from something like this, you would constantly see small air bubbles because of all this. It's bound to happen. So to avoid any of those things, the best thing that you can probably do is to actually knead this a bunch of times and then use it. But you see that there is absolutely no wastage in clay. I mean, we just reclaimed this clay, and in about less than about 30 minutes, we have a batch which is actually ready. At least it's not sticking now. It's kind of coming through very easily from the board, and ideally that's a good indication that your clay is ready to work with. The reason why that is considered an indicator, in my opinion, is because when you are working on pendants, the last thing that you want is basically for the pendants to kind of, or for the slab to kind of stick to your surface. You do not want that, because all of that shape kind of just, gets ruined when you're trying to pick it up. So this way at least you know, okay, your clay is almost there. But again, I repeat, please knead the clay before you actually start doing some work on it. So let's begin kneading the clay. So once I actually pat it down this way, what this also does is help get rid of the air pockets which is probably on the surface of the clay. So if you see, there are no visible cracks on the surface of the clay. And let's begin. What we'll do now is we'll start kneading this clay and knead it a bunch of times. So what this does is you realize that the clay is still a little bit wet, but it's getting more and more pliable. So what I'm doing over here is basically using this portion of my palm and controlling this portion with the mid portion just so that it doesn't spread out, and I'm using the fingers in order to pull it back. So what I do is I press, I pull, press, pull, press, pull, press, pull, press, pull, press, pull, press, pull. So on doing this a bunch of times, what happens is that your clay is basically getting more and more conditioned. So now you see that it's a lot less stickier, and do this a bunch of times, do the kneading a bunch of times, and you will be ready to use the clay for your jewelry purpose. I really hope you found this video useful, everyone. If yes, then please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.